Diana Miller had always thought of her life as predictable. From her steady job at the library to her husband Martin's reliable schedule at the accounting firm, everything seemed to follow an orderly rhythm. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable, and Diana took comfort in that. Little did she know, subtle cracks had begun to form in the foundation of their seemingly perfect life, and these cracks would soon widen into chasms she couldn't ignore. 2 months before the incident, Martin had started working late more often. His explanations seemed logical enough: quarterly reports, a demanding client, or training new hires. But Diana noticed the strain in his eyes when he came home, the stiffness in his hugs, and the absence of the laughter they used to share. She wanted to ask if something was wrong, but the words never seemed to come out right. Dallas, their daughter, was also feeling the strain of her own life. Balancing her final year at university with a part-time job and living at home to save money wasn't easy. While she loved her parents, their quiet tensions were becoming harder to ignore. One night, after a particularly awkward family dinner, Dallas overheard her father on the phone in his office. His tone was low and somber, unlike the usual calm confidence she associated with him. Though she couldn't make out the words, it left her uneasy. Around the same time, Diana found an old photo album tucked away in a closet while searching for winter clothes. Flipping through the pictures of vacations, birthdays, and anniversaries, she felt a pang of longing for the connection she and Martin once shared. Determined to reignite their bond, she planned a surprise weekend getaway, only to have him decline due to a critical meeting at work. Martin's struggles were not as straightforward as he let on. A year earlier, he had been involved in a minor car accident while carpooling with colleagues. Though the physical injuries were negligible, the emotional toll lingered. Sleepless nights became a routine, and the growing pressure at work only added to his mental fatigue. He had seen a doctor who dismissed his symptoms as stress-related, leaving him to navigate his turmoil alone. The night before the call, Diana had noticed Martin staring blankly at the family photo wall in their living room. When she asked what was on his mind, he simply shook his head and mumbled something about needing to get some fresh air. That was the last time she saw him before going to bed. Unbeknownst to her, Martin had driven away with no clear destination, his thoughts spiraling in directions he hadn't dared to acknowledge until then. It was an hour when no one should be making calls. Diana wasn't exactly sure of the time, but the incessant ringing of the phone at such a late hour was clearly out of place. Hoping against hope that it was Marty's phone and not hers, she pressed her face into the pillow, yelling, "Really? Thanks a lot," to the stillness of the room. The noise ceased after 5 insistent rings, prompting a wave of relief to wash over her. But just as she began to relax and adjust back into her comforting position, the unwelcome sound shattered the quiet once more. "Damn it!" Diana shouted, her frustration boiling over as her eyes flew open. She sat up, glaring into the darkness. "Martin, will you just answer the damn—" Her voice trailed off when she turned to find his side of the bed empty. She glanced at the glowing numbers on the clock, 3:37 a.m. Confused, she reached for her phone on the nightstand, her mind spinning with questions. Martin had been there when they went to sleep. Where could he have gone? A sudden vibration in her hand startled her. She answered the call groggily. "Hello? Is this Diana Miller?" a calm, unfamiliar voice asked. "Yes, it is," Diana replied, her irritation growing. "Who's calling?" "Are you the wife of Martin Miller?" the voice pressed. "Yes! For God's sake, who is this and what's going on?" Diana demanded, now fully awake. "This is the emergency room at Northtown Medical Center," the voice explained. "Your husband was brought in about an hour ago. We retrieved your contact information from the incident report." "A car accident?" Diana's voice trembled as dread washed over her. "Oh my God, is he all right?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," the caller said, their tone professional but firm. "I can't discuss his condition over the phone. We need you to come in immediately." "Yes, of course," Diana said, already scrambling to get out of bed. "I'm on my way." Diana bolted from her bed and rushed upstairs to her daughter's room. Dallas, who had been named after the city where she was conceived, was in her final year at a local university and lived at home to save money. She had once enjoyed the freedom of dorm life, but eventually chose the quieter environment of her family home to focus on her studies. "Dallas, wake up," Diana called softly, shaking her shoulder. No response. "Dal, wake up," she repeated, this time with more urgency, giving her shoulder another shake. Still nothing. "Dallas, wake up," Diana practically yelled. Startled, Dallas sat up groggily, blinking against the light her mother had just turned on. "Your dad's been in an accident. Diana said quickly. "He's in the ER. Get up and get dressed. We have to go now." Without hesitation, Dallas slid out of bed and began pulling on clothes, oblivious to her state of undress. Diana didn't notice either. She was too preoccupied rummaging through drawers to grab what her daughter might need. Once ready, they rushed out of the house and drove to the hospital. The normally short 10-minute drive felt endless as Dallas bombarded her mother with questions she couldn't answer. When they arrived, a nurse directed them to Martin's room. The sight of him hit them like a blow. He was covered in bandages, unconscious, and hooked to monitors. A nurse handed Diana some paperwork to fill out, a harsh reminder that even in moments of crisis, administrative tasks never wait. Dallas moved a chair close to her father's bed, her face pale with worry. About an hour later, 2 police officers entered the room, a man and a woman, both in uniform. "Good evening, ma'am," the woman began, her tone professional but sympathetic. "I'm Officer Gail Stanton, and this is my partner, Robert Hansen. We were the first responders at the scene." Diana stood, her anxiety evident. "Do you know how he's doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. She gestured toward the young woman at her side. "No one's told us anything yet." "Oh, and this is my daughter, Dallas." Officer Stanton shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have any updates on his condition," she said. "We're here to ask a few questions. I know this is a difficult time, but it's important we gather information as soon as possible." Diana hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." "Do you have any idea why your husband might have been out so late?" Stanton asked. "No," Diana said firmly, her expression resolute. "We went to bed together around 10 p.m. I had no idea he'd even left until the hospital called." Officer Stanton turned to Dallas. "Dallas, can you confirm that?" "Yes," Dallas replied, her voice steady but quiet. "We all watched a movie together, and then we went to bed. I saw Dad go into the bedroom with Mom." "What movie was it?" Stanton asked, her tone conversational but focused. Dallas hesitated, searching her memory. "Something with Keanu Reeves, an action movie. It was Dad's pick," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Stanton exchanged a glance with her partner before continuing. "Were there any issues at home recently? Financial struggles, marital problems?" "No," Diana said, shaking her head. "Nothing unusual, nothing serious." "Are you absolutely sure?" Stanton pressed. "Yes, I can't imagine why he'd leave without telling me." "Were there other people involved? Was anyone else hurt?" Diana asked anxiously. "That's the thing, ma'am," Stanton said carefully. "There wasn't another car involved. Witnesses saw your husband's vehicle suddenly accelerate before crashing head-on into a large oak tree at the corner of Highways 121 and 288. There were no skid marks and no one reported seeing brake lights." Diana and Dallas froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances as the implications of Stanton's words became clear. "Are you suggesting my husband did this on purpose?" Diana asked, her voice cracking. "You think he tried to—" "We're considering all possibilities," Stanton said calmly. "We'll need to examine the car for mechanical issues and speak with your husband when he regains consciousness." "You're wrong," Diana said, tears streaming down her face. "There has to be another explanation. Maybe he fell asleep or lost control. It was so late." Stanton placed her card on the table and told them to call if they remembered anything else. After the officers left, Dallas quietly shut the door. "You didn't tell them," Dallas said softly. "No," Diana replied, her voice steady despite the tears. "It's not their business. If your father chooses to say something, that's up to him. Until then, we wait." The following days dragged by at a snail's pace. Martin remained unconscious and under close observation in the hospital. Diana and Dallas spent as much time by his side as they could, ensuring he was never left alone. They often took turns keeping vigil, their focus entirely on Martin's recovery. Diana, who knew Martin's boss personally, made a call to inform him of the situation and that Martin would be unable to work for a while. She was careful with her words, avoiding anything that could hint at the possibility of a deliberate act. The accident had occurred late Saturday night, and it wasn't until Wednesday morning that Martin began showing signs of waking up. By midday, his eyes fluttered open, although his movements were limited. Diana, who was in the room at the time, noticed his eyes opening and rushed to his bedside to reassure him that everything would be okay. Moments later, a nurse hurried in, alerted by the monitors. Diana stepped back to give the nurse space, watching as more doctors arrived to assess Martin's condition. Taking the opportunity, she slipped out of the room to call Dallas and share the news. When her daughter didn't answer, Diana left a voicemail. As the day went on, much of the medical equipment attached to Martin was removed. Though his left arm was in a cast, his right-handedness meant it wouldn't hinder him too much. With his throat still sore from the breathing tube, he was provided with a whiteboard to communicate. He scribbled a message, and when the nurse read it, she paused to confirm with him. Martin nodded firmly. The nurse then stepped into the hallway, her expression serious. Moments later, she returned and approached Diana with an apologetic tone. "Mrs. Miller, I need to inform you that your husband has requested you and your daughter not be allowed back into his room." "What?" Diana's voice wavered in disbelief. "He's my husband. I have every right to be with him." "I'm sorry, but the patient's wishes take precedence," the nurse explained gently. "Let me speak to him. I'm sure we can work this out," Diana pleaded, trying to move past the nurse. When she was stopped, her desperation turned into shouting. "Martin! Martin, please talk to me. What's going on? Martin!" "Mrs. Miller," the nurse said firmly, "please stop yelling. You're disturbing other patients. You may wait outside, but if you try to enter the room again or continue making noise, we'll have to ask you to leave the building. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, I understand," Diana muttered, defeated. She sank into a chair outside the room, her head in her hands. About 45 minutes later, Dallas arrived at the hospital and found her mother sitting in the hallway, looking distraught. "Mom, what are you doing out here?" Dallas asked. "Your father doesn't want either of us in the room," Diana replied quietly. "Us?" Dallas repeated, confused. "I mean, I get why he'd ban you, but why me?" Diana's head snapped up. "What the hell is that supposed to mean? And why did it take you so long to get here?" Dallas hesitated. "Well, Bradley came over to check on me, and we're kind of—" "God, don't tell me you were with your boyfriend while your father's in the hospital," Diana interrupted, her voice sharp. Dallas shrugged. "He was unconscious when I left, and I needed to relax. It's been stressful, okay? For what it's worth, you might want to consider doing the same." "I don't want to hear it, Dallas," Diana said, her tone icy. "Let's not discuss this right now. It's inappropriate." Dallas smirked at the irony, but said nothing. Their tense conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, polished brunette. She wore professional attire, though her badge indicated she wasn't a doctor. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," the woman said as she entered Martin's room. "I'm Dr. Lassiter, one of the mental health specialists here. How are you feeling today?" "As well as can be expected," Martin replied, his voice still raspy but steady. 9 days had passed since the accident, and Martin had regained the ability to speak. The whiteboard was no longer needed, though his questions about when he could be discharged were met with vague answers. "The hospital asked me to check in with you," Dr. Lassiter continued. "Do I have a choice?" Martin asked, his tone resigned. "Not if you're hoping to go home soon," she replied with a wry smile. "Shall we begin?" Dr. Lassiter pulled a chair closer to his bed, crossing her legs as she reviewed his file. After a few moments, she looked up. "You were admitted here following a collision with a tree. I also see that you've restricted visits from your wife and daughter. I can't help but wonder if there's a connection." Martin nodded slightly. "She cheated on me." Dr. Lassiter sighed softly. "Infidelity is unfortunately common, though it doesn't usually lead to something as extreme as this. Is there more to the story?" Martin sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the ceiling as if searching for the words he didn't want to say. The silence stretched for minutes. He hated discussing his feelings, especially with an attractive woman. The thought crossed his mind, couldn't they have sent an older man for this? But Dr. Lassiter waited patiently, her calm demeanor betraying no irritation. She had seen this hesitation countless times before. Eventually, her patience paid off. "I think I've been dealing with depression," Martin finally admitted. "Not officially diagnosed or anything, but it's been hanging over me for a while." "Do you know what triggered it? Or has it just been a general feeling?" Dr. Lassiter asked gently. He hesitated again, then sighed. "I couldn't get in boner. It started about a year after an accident." She nodded, encouraging him to continue without judgment. "Go on." "It wasn't even a bad accident," Martin explained. "I was in the back seat. My boss was in the passenger seat, and his boss was driving. Someone rear-ended us. There wasn't much damage, no airbags deployed, nothing serious. But I wasn't braced for it, and I hit my head on the seat in front of me. That's where it all started, I think." Dr. Lassiter glanced at her notes and spoke evenly. "The report mentions a mild concussion." The man across from her nodded. "Yeah, my doctors ran every test you could imagine. They even repeated some. No one could pinpoint the exact cause. The best explanation I got was that something happened. Some part of my brain was damaged, and it affected, well, that." Dr. Lassiter leaned forward slightly, her tone probing but empathetic. And that led to difficulties in your marriage, she said, piecing the story together. Your wife wasn't satisfied with your bed life, which eventually led to her having an affair. Am I right? In a nutshell, yeah, he replied, his voice subdued. How long after the accident did this start? She asked. 7 or 8 months, maybe. We tried to work around it using, certain aids. He paused, embarrassed. I understand, Mr. Miller. No need to explain further, she said with a small smile. At first it seemed fine, Martin continued, his voice quieter. We thought it would be temporary, that I'd eventually recover. We used to talk about how, once I was better, we'd spend a whole weekend in bed together. Just the two of us. But that day never came. And after a while, she decided to meet her needs elsewhere. Did she discuss it with you beforehand? Dr. Lassiter asked, her tone measured. Martin shook his head, his voice tinged with bitterness. No. I found out by accident, came home from work early one day. Total cliché, I know. She was in our bedroom with him, and my daughter and her boyfriend were there too. Dr. Lassiter raised her eyebrows, surprised. Were they together? No, thank God, Martin replied quickly. Diana and Bill were in the bedroom, and Dallas and Brad were in the living room. That's how I found out. My wife was cheating on me, and my daughter not only knew about it, but seemed fine with it. Dr. Lassiter leaned back, processing his words. That explains why your daughter isn't allowed in the room either, she said thoughtfully. Yeah, Martin confirmed, his expression darkening. Oh, and Bill? He's Brad's father. We knew him before, just as Brad's dad. I later found out it was Dallas who suggested Bill to Diana. That was another blow. Did you confront them? Dr. Lassiter asked. Not really, Martin admitted, letting out a sharp breath. If Dallas hadn't been there, I probably would have confronted Diana. But I'd already seen enough of my daughter's anatomy that day, so I just left. Dr. Lassiter's expression softened, but she pressed on. And when you finally spoke to your wife? She didn't deny it, Martin said, his voice heavy with resignation. She said she was sorry, I knew, but made it clear she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. Her argument was simple. If I couldn't meet her needs, she had the right to find someone who could. And she wanted someone consistent, not random flings. Bill was single, so he fit the bill, no pun intended. Dr. Lassiter gave a small nod, her voice gentle. How did that make you feel? What could I say? Martin shrugged bitterly. She wasn't wrong. I couldn't give her what she needed. It wasn't her fault, and I didn't blame her for wanting a normal bed life. But it still hurt. If she'd asked your permission beforehand, would you have agreed? Dr. Lassiter asked. I've thought about that a lot, Martin admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. Part of me wants to say yes, because I loved her and wanted her to be happy, but I don't think I could have handled it. We made vows, in sickness and in health. I wouldn't have done that to her, and it eliminated me that she did it to me. Dr. Lassiter nodded, her tone calm but probing. And after you found out? Martin sighed, his frustration evident. She stopped hiding it. Before, it was only during the day when I was at work. After I knew it included weekends, trips to the store, she was with him more openly. That must have been incredibly difficult, Dr. Lassiter said gently, her expression sympathetic. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it, Martin said bitterly. But I didn't see what else I could do. She deserved happiness, and I couldn't provide it. It ate away at me. Dr. Lassiter leaned forward slightly. Tell me about the night of the accident. Martin exhaled slowly. We watched a movie as a family. I kept my feelings bottled up. I thought it was better not to burden them with my pain. They said goodnight. Diana kissed me. Dallas hugged me. But I realized Dallas didn't respect me anymore. Not as a father or a man, and I couldn't blame her. I didn't respect myself either. He paused before continuing. I got ready for bed, same as always. Diana fell asleep. I waited, then got dressed, grabbed my wallet and keys, and went upstairs. I looked in on Dallas. She was asleep. I blew her a kiss and whispered goodbye. Then I got in my car. And? Dr. Lassiter prompted gently. I didn't have a specific plan, Martin admitted. I drove aimlessly at first. Then I remembered the big oak tree. I drove past it once, then circled back. It was perfect. No obstacles, a clear path. I floored it and aimed straight for it. The room fell silent, as both Martin and Dr. Lassiter absorbed the weight of his story. After a moment, she spoke. Mr. Miller, thank you for trusting me with this. It's not easy to share something so deeply personal. I'd like to come back tomorrow to continue our conversation, if that's all right. Martin smirked faintly. I'm not going anywhere. After shaking hands with Dr. Lassiter, Martin watched her leave the room. He picked up his phone, which Diana had brought from home, despite his earlier instructions not to. Sorting through messages and emails, he replied to a few, including one to his boss to share an update on his condition. Then, setting the phone aside, he closed his eyes, hoping for some much-needed rest. Back at home, Diana wrestled with her thoughts. She convinced herself that Martin was okay with her relationship with Bill, that he had tacitly accepted it as an act of love, a way to make her happy. When she first learned about the crash, she doubted it was an accident, but now she was less sure. Diana suspected the police might have questioned Martin, though she hoped he hadn't mentioned Bill. Not that it mattered much. Infidelity wasn't a crime. Perhaps the authorities had chalked the crash up to a failed self-destruction attempt and moved on. Case closed. Still, Martin had never outwardly objected, had he? If he had, she couldn't recall. And she wasn't about to give up her personal life just because of a freak accident. Celibacy wasn't what she signed up for, and she wasn't about to accept it now. Once Martin was home, she decided she'd tread more carefully, perhaps tone down her meetings with Bill, but she wouldn't end the relationship entirely. The next morning, Dr. Lassiter returned as promised. Martin noticed her more casual outfit, but couldn't summon much interest. He gave her a polite nod as she entered. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Miller?" she asked with a warm smile. "About the same as yesterday, Doc," Martin replied with a faint shrug. "I'd love to go home, but I guess that's not up to me." Dr. Lassiter offered a reassuring smile. "Well, partially. State law requires a 72-hour hold after incidents like yours. The clock started with our conversation yesterday, so you've got about 2 days left." "That's fine, Doc. The food here isn't terrible, so I'll survive," Martin said with a small chuckle. They shared a brief laugh. "It's good to see you joking," Dr. Lassiter said. "That's a positive sign." "I think so too," Martin said, nodding. "It's been a while since I felt like myself. Months, really. I used to be a jokester, always teasing Dallas. It drove her nuts." Dr. Lassiter tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Have you had any darker thoughts since our last conversation? Any lingering regrets?" Martin shook his head. "Not really, Doc. The depression has lifted a bit. It's been replaced by anger and disappointment, mostly with Diana, a little with Dallas, but mostly with myself. I let things go too far. I never stood up for myself, never told Diana her behavior was unacceptable." Dr. Lassiter met his gaze steadily. "Do you plan to take that stand now?" "Absolutely," Martin said firmly. "As much as I've thought about divorce, I have to admit I bear some responsibility for letting her walk all over me. If she agrees to stop seeing Bill, I'm willing to go to counseling and work on our marriage." Dr. Lassiter tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's a significant shift in perspective. It's rare to see such a quick turnaround." Martin shrugged. "I had a lot of time to think while lying here before we talked. Being able to share my feelings with you helped me sort through them. I'm grateful for that." "Good to hear, Mr. Miller. I think we've made excellent progress. I'll check in with you tomorrow, but I don't see any reason why you can't be discharged as planned." "Thanks, Doc. I'm looking forward to getting out of here." When Martin was finally discharged, Diana and Dallas were there to take him home. Determined to turn over a new leaf, Martin decided to act as though things were already changing, even if they weren't quite there yet. The next week passed uneventfully. The airbags had done their job during the crash, and aside from a concussion that left him sensitive to light and sound, Martin's injuries were manageable. The TV stayed off, and soft music played quietly in the background as he rested. Diana and Dallas seemed eager to help, doting on him whenever he needed something. For a brief moment, things felt almost normal. Then, one afternoon, Diana announced casually, "I need to go shopping." "No," Martin said calmly, his tone steady but firm. Diana blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Martin repeated. "If we need something, make a list and Dallas can go." Dallas, lounging nearby, frowned. "Why are you dragging me into this?" she protested. "I have plans with Bradley." "Then you'd better finish quickly," Martin replied evenly, turning his attention back to Diana. "Diana, the list!" Diana's face hardened. "This is ridiculous. You can't just come home and start making demands. Dallas has plans, and I always do the shopping. That's final." Martin's expression darkened, his voice cutting through the room. "Do you think I don't know these shopping trips are an excuse to see Bill?" Her face froze mid-protest. "What are you talking about?" she asked cautiously. "You've used groceries as a cover for too long, Diana," Martin said, his tone low but unrelenting. "I see it in your eyes when you look at me, or rather when you don't. I notice the extra makeup, the nicer clothes. It's obvious, and it stops now." Diana stared at him in shock, her composure slipping. Even Dallas glanced at her father, her expression a mix of surprise and grudging respect. "Marty, please," Diana said after a moment, her voice trembling. "We've talked about this before. I'll try to be more discreet, but I'm not giving him up. I have the right to a bed life, and I intend to keep it." Martin's jaw tightened, his voice heavy with hurt. "So our vows meant nothing? In sickness and in health. Was that just empty words to you?" "I'm sorry, but this isn't what I agreed to," Diana shot back. "It's not my fault you can't give me what I need. I've done nothing wrong. I'm going shopping, and yes, I'll see Bill. If you want to talk about it tonight, fine." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The house fell silent. Dallas glanced at her father, who stood frozen in place. Without a word, Martin turned and walked to his bedroom, leaving the rest unsaid. For the first time in her life, Dallas Miller felt a gnawing anxiety about her family's future. Her parents' marriage, once the stable center of her world, now seemed precariously close to collapse. Her father had never truly confronted her mother before, and despite their struggles, nothing as serious as this had ever come between them. Deciding that the situation was beyond her control, she wiped her tears, pulled herself together, and left to meet Bradley. Meanwhile, Diana was grappling with conflicting feelings. A part of her hoped Martin would never fully recover, knowing deep down she might not be able to give up Bill. Bill was everything Marty wasn't: forceful, unyielding, and unapologetically direct. Marty, on the other hand, was gentle, caring, and predictable, and yet it was that very tenderness that now felt stifling to her. As night fell, Dallas returned home and found her father lying in bed. A faint light spilled from the slightly open bathroom door, the dim glow casting soft shadows across the room. She realized he had left the bathroom light on because the lamps in his room were too bright. "Dad?" she called softly. Martin didn't turn to face her, but responded, "Dallas, I'm sorry." His voice caught her off guard, and she moved closer, noticing the weight in his tone. She stood in the doorway, tears welling in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Martin hesitated. Since learning of her role in facilitating Diana's affair, he had stopped using the affectionate nicknames he once called her. Even now, as he saw the tears in her eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if this was genuine or a calculated attempt to win his favor. Still, he decided to hear her out. Dallas stepped closer, standing at the foot of the bed. "I'm sorry for what I did, Dad. I thought I was helping Mom. She was so upset about everything you were going through. About how you couldn't—" She paused, her eyes meeting his. You couldn't." Martin nodded slightly, allowing her to continue. "Bradley's dad was going through the same thing after Mrs. Coyle died. He always talked about how lonely he was. I thought they could help each other. I never thought about how it would hurt you. I was just trying to make things easier for Mom." "Is that why you did it?" Martin asked, his voice cautious. He wasn't sure if this sudden confession was sincere, but he decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Yes," Dallas admitted, her voice cracking. "I thought I was helping. I didn't realize how much damage I was causing." For a moment, their eyes met, and Martin managed a faint smile. "It's over now, Dally. I won't let this happen again." "I hope so," she said, wiping her tears. "I need you, Dad. Are you going to divorce Mom?" "I haven't decided yet," Martin said honestly. "It depends on whether she's willing to end things with Bill. But don't say anything. If she changes, it has to be because she wants to, not because she's pressured." Dallas nodded. "Okay, Dad, I should head upstairs." "Oh, I broke up with Bradley tonight." Martin raised an eyebrow, surprised. He had never liked Bradley much, but hadn't expected this. "Why?" Dallas hesitated before answering. "Because my dad told me once that he wasn't good enough for me. And tonight, I realized he was right." "You were right, Dad, about a lot of things." A small smile spread across Martin's face. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of pride. Dallas leaned forward and hugged him tightly, a rare moment of closeness they hadn't shared in years. When they pulled apart, she smiled softly and left the room, heading upstairs. The sound of her bedroom door closing was soon followed by the familiar chirp of Diana's car unlocking. The warmth Martin had just felt was instantly replaced with a cold dread. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come. A few moments later, Diana walked into the bedroom, her hair damp and her skin freshly scrubbed. Martin suspected she had showered at Bill's house, an effort, no doubt, to return home without lingering evidence of her infidelity. "Can you help with the groceries?" she asked, her tone casual. "Are there actually groceries?" Martin asked, sitting up slowly. Yes, Marty. I told you I went shopping, and I did. He followed her to the car, unloading the bags and placing them on the counter. As he unpacked, he noticed a glaring absence of perishable items. A receipt tucked into one of the bags caught his attention. It was time-stamped nearly 2 hours ago. First I went shopping, Diana said, as though reading his thoughts. Then I went to see Bill. Though he had expected as much, hearing her say it stung. Martin finished unpacking in silence and retreated to the bedroom, his mind racing. There was no point in arguing. It wouldn't change her behavior. Diana had made her intentions clear. Now, the next move was his. A few minutes later, Diana entered the bedroom, her tone softer. Did you want to talk? No, Diana, Martin said flatly. You've made your position very clear. Diana hesitated. She loved her husband. He was her best friend and the person she trusted most. But she didn't believe her need for closeness should be an issue given the circumstances. She hoped Martin would come to see it the same way. Sensing his resolve, she sighed and moved toward her closet. She had briefly considered rekindling some closeness with Martin, but tonight wasn't the night. By the time she returned, dressed for bed, Martin appeared to be asleep, or at least pretending to be. Diana climbed into bed, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. For now, they both remained in limbo, teetering on the edge of decisions that could either shatter their family or begin to rebuild it. The divorce was anything but smooth. Diana was enraged when the papers were served, and Marty, ever considerate, chose to have them delivered to the house while he spent the day with Dallas. After moving into the guest room next to Dallas's upstairs bedroom, Diana dug in her heels. She hired a fiercely aggressive attorney who pulled out all the stops, including an attempt to declare Marty mentally unfit, citing the incident with the tree as a self-destruction attempt. Anticipating such a move and believing it wise regardless, Marty had already begun seeing a well-regarded psychologist by the time the papers were filed. The psychologist's testimony that Marty was stable and no longer a self-destruction risk quickly dismantled that argument, and the judge sided with him. The legal battle might have dragged on indefinitely, but when Diana seemed ready to escalate further, Dallas stepped in. She confronted her mother, making it clear that Diana's actions had crossed a line. Mom, your needs don't outweigh the promises you made. Life isn't fair, but you vowed to stand by Dad even when it's hard. If you keep fighting this, it's going to ruin our relationship. Maybe forever. Faced with the prospect of losing both her husband and daughter, Diana reluctantly stopped contesting the divorce. The house was sold, and Marty agreed to several years of alimony, knowing the court would have ordered it anyway. Diana rented a 2-bedroom apartment near her job and resumed working full-time 8 months after the divorce was finalized. But the ordeal left her bitter, especially when Bill unceremoniously ended their relationship. Apparently, Bill had been seeing other women, and Diana's appeal diminished once she was no longer married. Dallas continued her studies, splitting her time between her parents' homes. Over time, Diana began to play the sufferer, repeatedly blaming Marty for the divorce. One evening, as Diana once again lamented, "If only he had been more understanding," Dallas lost her temper. "Did you ever think about Dad?" she shouted, silencing her mother. It was a Friday night, and Marty found himself walking into a dimly lit club around 10 p.m. He wasn't looking for anything serious, just a distraction. A few drinks, maybe a dance or two, and a chance to unwind. Settling at the bar, he ordered a rum and coke and scanned the crowd. His eyes landed on a woman at the far end of the bar. Something about her seemed familiar. She had long, dark brown hair, and her dress barely concealed her curves. An almost empty glass of wine sat in front of her. Curious, Marty studied her until recognition dawned. A small smile tugged at his lips as he picked up his drink and walked over. The woman noticed him as he approached. "Dr. Lassiter?" he said, testing the waters. She studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place him. For a moment, Marty thought he might have been mistaken. "I'm off duty," she said at last, a small smile playing on her lips. "Here, I'm just Vicky. But I think you've got me at a disadvantage." Marty chuckled, leaning back slightly. "It's been a while. You probably see far more patients than I see psychologists." "I'm usually better with names than faces," Vicky said with a playful challenge. "Test me." "Martin Miller," he said, watching her carefully. She paused, tilting her head in thought, and for a moment Marty was certain she wouldn't remember. But then her expression shifted, and a spark of recognition lit her eyes. "Ah, Mr. Miller," she said with a teasing grin. "An unfaithful wife and an unfortunate encounter with a tree, if I recall correctly." That's me, Marty replied, impressed. I can't believe you remember. It's been almost 2 years. Sometimes I get lucky, Vicky said with a shrug. She motioned to the empty seat beside her. Care to join me? Marty nodded, sliding onto the bar stool as he gestured for the bartender to refill their drinks. So, what brings you here tonight? He asked. Dating someone? I'm trying, Vicky replied, a playful glint in her eye. Really? I thought I remembered a pretty impressive ring on your finger. That was then, she said with a nonchalant shrug. The divorce was finalized not long after we spoke. My ex-husband had more in common with a 20-year-old cashier and her friends than with me. I couldn't convince him otherwise. Wow, Marty said, raising an eyebrow. Are they still together? She laughed lightly, shaking her head. You'd be surprised, Marty, but once the papers were signed, I stopped caring about Wayne's marital status. Fair enough, Marty said, smiling. And please, call me Marty, or Martin. Anything but Mr. Miller. What did your wife call you? Vicky asked, her tone sly and teasing. Marty, he admitted with a grin. Well then, Marty, Vicky said, standing and offering her hand. Care to take me for a spin on the dance floor? With pleasure, he said. He asked the bartender to hold their drinks, then led Vicky by the hand to the dance floor. The music was upbeat, and they quickly fell into rhythm. 2 fast songs gave way to a slower one, and they stayed on the floor, moving closer. Vicky wrapped her arms around Marty's neck, and he placed his hands firmly on her back. As they swayed to the music, Marty couldn't help but notice the softness of her body and the faint, intoxicating scent of her perfume. When the song ended, Vicky leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. Martin, I'm tired of dancing, she whispered, but I'm also very lonely. Maybe you can help me with that. Marty didn't hesitate. He took her hand, led her back to the bar, and paid the tab. The bartender didn't seem surprised. Outside, they got into Marty's car. Vicky had arrived via Uber, which made the decision easy. Maybe I should have asked earlier, Marty said, glancing at her, but how much did you drink? It was my first glass of wine when you walked up. Why? Because I don't take advantage of drunk women, he said. Don't worry, she said with a warm smile. I know exactly what I'm doing, Martin. Martin pulled his car into the underground parking garage and guided Vicky to the elevator. She clung to his arm, and they exchanged several passionate kisses as they ascended to his floor. The tension between them was electric, and as soon as the door to his apartment clicked shut behind them, Vicky wasted no time. She grabbed the hem of her dress and pulled it over her head in one swift motion. Wow, Vicky, Martin said, his voice low with awe. You're stunning, she smirked. Thanks, Martin, but are you just going to stand there and stare? Absolutely not. Good. Then show me where your bedroom is. Taking her hand, Martin led her down the hallway. He felt a twinge of relief knowing Dallas was spending the weekend at her mother's place. I hope you've got rubbers, Vicky teased as they stepped into the room. Martin opened his nightstand drawer, revealing a small stash, which he placed on the nightstand. They didn't waste any time. For over an hour, the two of them lost themselves in each other, the chemistry undeniable. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Martin on his back and Vicky nestled against his side. The room was quiet, and they drifted in that comfortable space between wakefulness and sleep. Vicky stirred first, raising her head slightly. Martin, she murmured. He responded sleepily. I just remembered something from your story, she said, her voice curious. There was some mention of erectile dysfunction. Care to explain? Martin chuckled softly. Well, that's clearly no longer a problem. Vicky smiled but pressed on. What happened? A few months after the oak tree incident, Martin began, choosing his words carefully. I started feeling this odd tingling sensation. It reminded me of how people describe a paralyzed limb regaining feeling. It went on for weeks. Were you still married then? Vicky asked. Did you tell Diana? We were technically still married, but we'd been living apart for a while, Martin replied. And no, I didn't tell her. It wasn't her business at that point. Over the next several months, things started working again. Sporadic at first, but then more consistently. By 8 or 9 months, everything was back to normal. What did the doctors say? They were baffled, Martin admitted, shaking his head. They ran every test imaginable, compared scans from before and after, and couldn't find a definitive explanation. Their best guess was that the impact with the tree somehow reset something in my brain. But honestly, they didn't know for sure. Well, Vicky said with a sly smile, whatever the reason, I'm grateful. I hope you don't mind if I stay the night." "Not at all," Martin replied with a grin, "as long as there's more Zex in the morning, followed by breakfast." "Deal," Vicky said, settling back down against him. They drifted off to sleep, but before long, Martin stirred again, his voice soft in the darkness. "Vicky?" She replied sleepily. "Do you think you're ready for something serious? A real relationship?" There was a long pause, and Martin's heart sank as he worried he had overstepped. For a moment he thought she might get up and leave, but she stayed. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Can we talk about it in the morning?" "Of course," Martin said gently. "Good night, Vicky." "Good night, Martin," she replied, her tone warm and reassuring. Vicky woke first and let Martin sleep while she took a shower. She wandered into the kitchen and began searching for something to make for breakfast. Martin's question lingered in her mind. She hadn't been looking for anything serious, just some fun and companionship. But the truth was, she liked Martin a lot. For months, she'd told herself she didn't need a man in her life. But now she wasn't so sure. The smell of cooking woke Martin. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Vicky wearing his shirt from the night before and an apron she'd found in a closet. "I was going to invite you to breakfast," he teased. "Looks like you beat me to it." "You can take me to lunch," she quipped. "Go take a quick shower. Breakfast will be ready when you're done." 10 minutes later, Martin returned to find the table set with an omelet, sausages, and buttered toast. "I didn't even know I had sausages in the freezer," he said, sitting down. "They were buried," Vicky said with a grin. "I hope it's edible." Martin took a bite and smiled. "It's delicious." They ate quietly, chatting about trivial things. Afterward, Martin took charge of cleaning up while Vicky sat on the couch. When he finished, he turned to her. "Are you ready to talk now?" he asked. "Mostly," Vicky said, standing and holding out her hand. "But can we do it in the bedroom? I'll be more comfortable there." They sat on the bed facing each other, Vicky holding Martin's hands tightly. "Martin, I need to be honest with you. I think you're amazing, and I definitely like you, but there's something you should know." He nodded for her to continue. "My ex-husband didn't just leave me for a younger woman. The main reason was because I can't have children. He wanted kids, his own kids, and left to find someone who could give them to him. He refused to consider adoption. After the divorce, I felt like a failure." Martin squeezed her hands. "Vicky, I'm over 40. I have an adult daughter. I wouldn't mind kids, but it's not a deal breaker." She exhaled, relief softening her expression. "Thank you for saying that. One more thing. After my divorce, I wasn't in a good place. Losing my husband to someone half my age really shook my confidence. I started to feel old." "You're 37, Martin said gently. "You're not old." "I know," she said with a small laugh. "But at the time, I let myself believe it. I don't know if I'm ready for something serious, but I know I want to see where this could go." Martin smiled. That's all I needed to hear. They both chuckled softly, the tension in the room easing. "I used to feel incomplete," Vicky began, her voice steady but introspective. "It's hard to explain, but I didn't feel like a woman. How could I? When I couldn't have children. I know it's not logical, but that's how I felt back then. So I tried to prove to myself that I was still a woman, if not through motherhood, then through being desirable. I reinvented myself as Angela and started going home with men, most of them strangers. It was empowering at first, but eventually it felt self-destructive. I started seeing a therapist and slowed down, but it took time before I could stop entirely." Martin considered her words, choosing his next carefully. "Isn't that what you were doing last night?" he asked gently, making it clear he wasn't judging her. "You looked like you were on the prowl." Vicky smiled ruefully. "Yes, I suppose I was. I have needs, Martin, just like any woman. But I've become more selective. I only go home with someone when I feel a real connection. There are plenty of nights I return home alone and take care of things myself." "Well, I'm glad I passed the test," Martin said with a playful grin. "You did?" Vicky replied warmly. "And, to answer your earlier question, I'd like to explore where this might go, but I want to be honest about my past. I was fortunate. Despite my behavior, I never contracted anything. I've been tested regularly, and I can provide proof if it would help you feel comfortable. I don't need birth control, but I'd like us both to get tested and agree to exclusivity if we're going to move forward." Martin sat quietly, processing everything she had said. Vicky waited, her patience masking her nervousness. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said. "I know that couldn't have been easy. I think I owe you the same honesty. Our situations aren't so different." Vicky tilted her head, intrigued, as Martin continued. "After my divorce, I felt relieved at first, but then the depression hit. I couldn't see a future for myself. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone, especially since my condition hadn't improved. My therapist suggested that as I aged, I might find women who valued companionship over physical closeness. But when my body started recovering, unexpectedly I might add, I felt the need to prove I was still a man. I went out looking for women, not to connect, but to validate myself." He sighed. "I wasn't very picky. Some of the women, well, let's just say I made some questionable choices. It caught up with me when I ended up with gonorrhea. That was a wake-up call. My doctor and therapist both helped me reassess my behavior. It's been years since I've been with anyone without protection, and I'd be happy to get tested for us." Vicky smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "So are we doing this, you and me?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Absolutely," Martin replied with a grin. Over the next few months, Martin and Vicky's relationship grew stronger. They spent nearly every night together, splitting time between their homes. Vicky got along well with Dallas, and it seemed only a matter of time before they married. The inevitable confrontation with Diana happened about 3 months into their relationship. Martin and Vicky were at a club catering to a more mature crowd, enjoying drinks and conversation when Martin's expression abruptly changed. His smile faded as he looked past Vicky. She turned to follow his gaze and saw a familiar face heading their way, Diana. Diana approached the table with a smirk. Though the divorce had been finalized over a year ago, she still harbored bitterness. In her mind, she'd done nothing wrong beyond being too open about her affair. The fact that Martin had moved on only fueled her resentment. "Marty," Diana said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What a surprise." "Diana," Martin replied evenly, then turned to Vicky. "This is my ex-wife, Diana. Diana, this is Vicky." "Nice to meet you, Diana," Vicky said politely, her tone firm. "I've heard a lot about you." "Well, I've heard absolutely nothing about you," Diana retorted bitterly. "We're divorced, Diana," Martin said calmly. "It's been over a year. My life is no longer your concern. If you don't mind—" He left the implication hanging, inviting her to leave. "Oh, of course, Martin," Diana replied with mock sweetness. Then, turning to Vicky, she added, "But before I go, there's something you should know." "And what's that?" Vicky asked, arching an eyebrow. "You probably don't want to get too involved with him," Diana said smugly. "We divorced because he couldn't perform." Martin watched Vicky closely, curious how she would handle the situation. To his surprise, she suppressed a laugh and turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Is that true, Martin?" she teased. "I don't think you mentioned this." Martin shrugged. It was her moment to handle as she pleased. Diana's satisfaction evaporated when Vicky replied with a mischievous smile. "Well, if what I experienced last night wasn't real, then a real one would probably eliminate me." Diana's jaw dropped. "Wait, what? Marty, you're not saying it works now?" "Like a champion," Martin said evenly. "Just as good as ever." "How is that possible? Did the doctors find a cure?" Diana demanded, visibly flustered. "They think it just needed time to recover," Martin replied, his tone growing firmer. "If you'd been patient and honored our vows, we might still be married." Diana stood speechless for several moments before finally whispering, "I'm sorry, Marty. I was selfish and short-sighted. I ruined a good marriage." Without waiting for a response, Diana turned and left the club. Martin and Vicky watched her go, both feeling a twinge of pity. Then Martin turned back to Vicky. "Let's dance," he said softly. 6 months later, Martin and Vicky married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. It wasn't the beginning of a new life. It was the continuation of one they had both fought to rebuild, together. In the years that followed, Martin and Vicky built a life together grounded in trust, healing, and mutual respect. Their shared experiences, marked by loss, recovery, and new beginnings, gave them a bond neither had anticipated but both deeply cherished. Martin found renewed purpose in his work and personal life, volunteering to mentor young professionals struggling with challenges like he once faced. Vicky, too, used her own journey as inspiration, leading seminars on resilience and emotional well-being. Together, they often joked that their love story began in a hospital room and blossomed under the most unlikely circumstances. Dallas thrived in her career, taking lessons from her parents' struggles to build a foundation of honesty in her own relationships. She became a bridge between her mother and father, ensuring that even as their paths diverged, the family remained connected in its own way. As for Diana, time softened the bitterness she once carried. Though she never found the same depth of connection Martin and Vicky shared, she gradually came to terms with her mistakes, finding solace in her role as a mother and a professional. On quiet evenings, Martin and Vicky often sat on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. In those moments, they didn't dwell on the past or worry about the future. They simply held hands, grateful for the second chance life had given them and the strength they found in each other. The oak tree still stood at the corner of Highways 121 and 288, a silent witness to a life's turning point. For Martin, it was no longer a symbol of despair, but a testament to how far he had come.